This is episode 20 of the Joyful Movement Show, and today I have a special guest whose story is very similar to my own and maybe yours too. We're going to be talking about how to tell when your healthy lifestyle isn't really all that healthy. She's got some great wisdom and some helpful tips for you, so stay tuned. Hi there! Welcome to the Joyful Movement Show. I'm your host, Kim Hagel, mom, recovering dieter, and founder of Radiant Vitality Wellness. As a personal trainer with my own story of body acceptance, I've seen firsthand how diet culture influences the fitness industry and the damage it causes the women I work with, keeping them on the start-stop cycle, struggling to find motivation. It's now my mission to empower women to break free from torturous exercise, restrictive eating, and body shame. Stick with me and I'll help you discover what moves you so that you can tap into that burning motivation deep inside yourself and experience joyful movement, peace with food, and feel confident in your own skin. Are you ready? Let's lace up our runners, pop the earbuds in, and go for a walk while we chat. Well, hello, friend, and welcome back. I'm so thankful that you're here. I'm really excited about this episode. I'm joined today by Chanelle Belliveau, who is an intuitive eating and body image coach, and she's on a mission to help women ditch wellness dieting for good so they can become their healthiest self without obsession or restrictions. And this is the topic that I am most passionate about, and Chanelle shares my passion. So we had a really deep, vulnerable, and meaningful talk. If you're tuning in for the first time, I'm Kim Hagel, personal trainer and registered holistic nutritionist, but I'm also a recovering dieter. I have a 30-year history of being unhappy with my body, and I've tried all the things to try to change it. But here's the thing. I didn't think I was dieting, especially at the end of it all. I mean, I did Weight Watchers and some of the other conventional diets along the way, but at the tail end of my whole saga, I honestly believed I was chasing health. Of course, I've studied nutrition, and I think my motives for that will be revealed by the end of this little intro I'm going to give you. And I devoted myself to learning about the body and what types of food and movement it took for my body to function its best, what health really meant or what I thought it meant. I read all the books and I was well versed in how sugar, gluten, dairy, and processed foods were causing inflammation and essentially killing me. So I ate clean, and I put that in air quotes, because all the books and all the science said that's what you're supposed to do. And of course, I'm sure I felt added pressure to do it right because of the industry that I'm in. I felt I needed to be a good example to everyone who might be looking to me as a role model. I kept that up for a really long time. I ate perfectly. Again, I've got that in air quotes. And I worked out hard, a couple hours a day. My whole life revolved around my wellness. And yet there was this side to me that I kept really well hidden. I weighed myself frequently, depending on the program I was following at the time, sometimes daily, but usually more like weekly. If that number on the scale went up, I'd make adjustments to my eating or exercise, restrict a little more, add a little more intensity to the workout. I'd count every gram of every macro of every morsel that went into my mouth. And if someone would invite me out, I'd check out the menu of the restaurant first before accepting the invite to be sure that they'd have stuff on the menu for me to eat. And I'd wait all week for my cheat day. I'd be so good and so disciplined all week long, and then I'd plan for that little indulgence, which would inevitably turn into a Last Supper-like free-for-all. My whole life was consumed by my lifestyle. It's literally all I thought about. But I couldn't let it go because, one, everything I heard or read validated that this is what healthy looked like. And two, I was so afraid of the judgment of what people would think of me if I wasn't perfectly thin and fit. And three, it might mean that I'd have to look at some of the bigger issues in my life that I was using this whole issue to avoid. And when it comes down to it, that's really what was at the root of my healthy lifestyle attempts. It clearly wasn't about health because I was sacrificing my health on every level, physically, mentally, emotionally. It was about validation and needing to feel worthy. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have recovered and come out the other side of that, thank heavens. It took a lot of work and I had a lot of support. And that's why I do what I do now. And Chanelle too, because we know that there are others struggling with the same issues and you can't get through this on your own. So if you're listening to this podcast in real time, then I've actually got an event coming up, a free event that I created for exactly this reason. Embrace Your Radiance is a 10-day online non-diet health summit featuring 10 leading experts in this field to help you break free from diet culture and chase health and vitality in your now body. It's going to be amazing. And I encourage you to check out the link in my show notes where you can learn more about that and register. It's on my website, www.radiantvitality.ca/embraceyourradiance. So Chanelle, that you're about to hear from, is actually one of the experts going to be featured at this event. So you'll get a little sneak peek into her style. Like I say, this is a juicy episode. Chanelle has so much to share about healthism, body image, intuitive eating, and chasing health at any size. So without further ado, here's Chanelle. Hey there, Chanelle. Welcome to the Joyful Movement Show. I'm so excited to have you here with me today.
So excited to be here.
Yeah. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation because, we've known each other for a little while and I think we have a lot in common, both with our history with dieting and our history with breaking up with diets and how our business has kind of evolved as a result of that. So yeah, I think we're going to have a great chat.
I think so too.
Yeah. Can you share with our listeners just a little introduction about yourself and what it is that you do now?
Of course. So my name is Chanelle and I come from small town Moncton in New Brunswick in Canada. I'm an intuitive eating and body image coach as well, with a background in holistic nutrition. And obviously it's kind of like you had mentioned, I guess, I have extensive background and it was like a full-time job for myself to restrict and diet.
Me too.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I do now. I'm multi-passionate. I have lots of stuff on the go, but intuitive eating and being able to help other women find a healthy that isn't obsessive is really at the core of everything that I do, because I find it's like really, really important work and a message that needs to be shared more.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I talk a little bit about intuitive eating on my show, but just for those for whom it might be a new term, can you just give us a real 2-sentence synopsis of what is intuitive eating?
100%. Yeah. So intuitive eating basically in short is being able to give ourselves back the power and give ourselves back like the ability to nourish ourselves without needing all the outside sources to tell us what to eat, when to eat, and how much to eat. And according to Evelyn and Elise, from the dietitian that founded intuitive eating, it's a self-care eating framework, basically.
Yeah.
So in big.
Yeah. So like really just trusting that your body knows what it wants and what it wants and how much, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Love that. Okay. So take us back in history a little bit. Talk to us about your dieting history and how that all got started. And did you at the time even identify as a dieter?
Yeah. So that's always a really interesting question. And I think being, is that what they call it? Millennial? I feel like growing up, when I started restricting, for me, like, I feel like by that time when it started, it's like how they say like dieting is like so passé, like it's not cool anymore. So like now it's like the wellness dieting, it's like being healthy. So like, for example, my background, well, first it started, I actually went through several different eating disorders when I was in high school. So I was diagnosed with anorexia early on, orthorexia also, which kind of ties in with healthism and what we'll probably talk about later too.
Mhm.
And then later on, binge eating disorder.
Mm.
So when I finally recovered from those eating disorders through like a really supportive community, I thought that I was like, not healed, but I was like in a much better place, which I was. But for myself, I still continued restricting without truly noticing that what I was doing was actually still harming me. So I went and actually, once I started recovering from my eating disorders, I went vegan for 4 years. Yes, there was some ethical purposes behind it, but it was mostly because I thought it was the healthier thing to do. So
Yes.
I went vegan for 4 years. And then I started in holistic nutrition at CSNN where I live. And then I started realizing that veganism wasn't for me anymore, and I wanted to start listening to my body a little bit more. So I went and started incorporating meat again into my diet, but then I felt into the wellness diet. So it was like, okay, well, we learned in school that like refined sugars and flours creates like inflammation. It's gonna kill you.
Mhm.
That's what we learned.
Yeah.
And that basically like I went out and I've cut out like gluten, dairy, soy, refined sugars, a bunch of other different things. Like
Mhm.
I was pretty much like self-diagnosing myself like according to what I was learning instead of actually going for like proper tests. So
Mhm.
I was doing those and restricting all those things because I thought it was the healthier thing to do,
Mhm.
again because for that reason.
Yeah.
And then I also had like the background of like trying a few different things. I like dabbled in like herbal cleansing because I thought that my body needed cleanses at least like 3 times a year because I didn't thought that my body could cleanse itself and detox itself. I went and I did paleo, Whole30, which is all things that seems really healthy and is
Yeah.
being promoted as health promoting behaviors, but really the reason why it wasn't like it didn't work in the term of being healthy for me was that it was really obsessive, and it was all in the purpose of trying to stay thin and trying to like not gain weight,
Yeah.
because that's what I thought it meant to be healthy. So also to answer to your question, so no, I didn't identify as a dieter because I was like, oh, well, I'm just doing like lifestyle changes. And it's like, oh, well, it's like, I'm eating clean. It's like, it was, and that's one of the things that I find that was also one of the things that I find is also super important to bring forward. And especially having conversation like this is because now that dieting isn't cool anymore and that it's now like the whole realm of like the wellness like diets and like air quotes and the lifestyle changes, stuff like that, it's all like it's still promoting like disordered eating and stuff like that. So I find that like because people I guess, yeah, people don't identify with dieting anymore.
Yeah.
So it's kind of what I'm trying to say with that.
No, I get that. And like you say, dieting is really taboo these days, and it's not,
Mhm.
we all know we shouldn't diet. Um,
Yeah.
and so we're focused on these healthy ways to eat, and yet at
Yeah.
the bottom of all of these, and I'm air quoting too,
Yeah.
healthy lifestyles is still the belief that you're going to end up in a thin body when you do it, right? They all show the
Yeah.
before and after pictures, and they all
Exactly.
sell thinness as the ultimate goal. And I heard you say at the tail end of your story there that really was your motive behind
Hmm.
your healthy diets, was to lose weight or achieve that thin ideal body.
Exactly.
Why do you think that was your focus? What do you think that says about you and about society in general?
Hmm. So one thing that I find that's really interesting is especially because whenever people will say that they're like doing certain things or restricting certain things because they're doing it for health purposes,
Mhm.
like 99% of the time, it's never about the food itself, but about what's behind the food. And what I've often noticed even with myself, is that whenever I was trying, especially when I was in nutrition school, I'll always remember when I walked in class. It was like the first week, and then I had one of my classmates that came to class with a can of Pepsi, and like everyone looked at him like, oh my god, like what are you doing? We're like in nutrition class, you're drinking Pepsi, like. And then like not that he was shamed for it, but like, you could see
Maybe a
that he was
little.
getting like,
Yeah.
people were looking at him in like a different way. And for me, seeing that, I was like, okay, wow, well, now that I'm studying in nutrition, I have to portray this
Mm-hmm.
picture and this person to society that, I'm like eating well, I'm like eating like perfectly clean and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. And that it was mostly just about trying to fit into society's ideal like
Mm-hmm.
beauty standard and like the teen ideal. And it was mostly just to be like, yeah, just like accepted by other. So deep down it kind of came down to that specifically.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
I get what you're saying too. And I remember having a lot of those same thoughts, like being a nutritionist, being a personal trainer, and one like being worried about what people saw in my grocery cart, that I might not
Yeah.
be eating perfectly. But I also felt like my body was an outward representation of that I was doing it right. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, I
Mhm.
can
So when
totally
did
agree.
you realize, or how did you come to realize that your healthy lifestyle wasn't so healthy anymore?
Yeah. So for one, so I guess for me, my true realization was when, well, we would know because I had this conversation, I think, with you before, but when I started my non-diet mentorship program with Stephanie Doulier,
Hmm.
and basically she brought forward to me on our first meeting, and she said like, oh, so like you're telling me that you're like eating intuitively, because at that time that's what I thought I was doing,
Uh-huh.
because I was no longer like, following those like fad diets or like counting calories and macros and so forth, but I was still restricting like a bunch of foods for no medical purposes.
Oh.
And then she brought that to my attention. She was like, okay, so like you're telling me you're eating intuitively. I was like, yes, I allow myself all food except for gluten, dairy, soy, refined sugars, and so forth. And she was like, okay, so you're
Okay.
telling me like, so. And then she asked me, she was like, but are you like really like intolerant to those foods? Are you like, is it food allergies? And I was like, well, no, like I haven't been tested. It hasn't been like, I'm not celiac or anything. And she was like, okay, so like, is it really though? Like, are you really intolerant to those foods? And I was like, well, in my mind, I was like
Yeah.
secretly boiling. I was like, how do you dare like tell me that my symptoms are not valid? And she was like, maybe try to look more into it, and maybe it's just the stress that you have around those foods that are causing those symptoms. I
Hmm.
do want to mention though that I know that food intolerances and food allergy are still a real thing, but
Absolutely.
for myself, in my case, it was just something that I was restricting because I thought I was, but
Mhm.
it was mostly like most of what was happening within my body was just because of the stress
Mhm.
that was being created around like whenever I was eating those foods. So when she told me that, and it just made me really take a good hard look at my eating habits. And that's when I realized like holy frig, like I'm like stressed out about food all the time.
Oh,
I'm always like thinking about food 24/7, wondering like if I'm going to be able to eat out with friends, if there's going to be options for me. um Basically I'm around arranging my whole schedule around like what I'm able to eat whenever I'm not able to eat. And it was just like, and often, and I know there's probably some people that will be able to relate with that, but one of the big issues too was that I would like, and again air quote, like eat clean
mhm.
according to my own food rules all week, and then either on the weekend whenever I would go out and eat with friends, and I would just say like, oh, like screw it, I'm just gonna like eat whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
And then I would go and like eat like, I don't know, like a piece of bread, and then it would lead to something else, and then I would be like, oh well, I'm just gonna feel already like I'm not gonna feel good in my body anyway, so I might as well just eat everything that I can because I need to start clean again tomorrow.
Mhm.
And it was just like this vicious cycle of like feeling like really at like with like unease in my body from being like overly full from like binging all the time, but also like that mental toll it had on me, like the days after,
Mhm.
and like feeling like really bad about myself and the choices that I had made. And it like it made like strains like with my family, like with my partner, and like just my like social life in general, like isolating to like eat like in secret. And it's just like that's when I really realized that like even though like I, again in air quotes, looked healthy to
Mhm.
everyone else around me, I was far from the picture of being healthy because of all those behaviors and all those things that were happening in secret. So
Yeah. I
yeah.
hear you 100%. That was my life too. I totally
Yeah.
relate to constantly thinking about every meal and what I would eat if I went out and what people would say, and having looking forward to that cheat meal, and then
Oh,
just like
100%.
going crazy on it because you're going to feel bad anyways, so why not just blow the whole
Yeah.
thing? I totally hear that. So that brings up an important point, because a concern I hear from women a lot when they're considering intuitive eating is that if they allow themselves those foods that have previously been forbidden, or that they only allow on their cheat days, the pizza or the donuts or the pop or
Yeah.
wine, whatever it might be, that's all they'll ever eat, right? Because when they've allowed themselves that little bit on their cheat day, they go and overeat on it. So then they think if
Yeah.
they embrace intuitive eating, that all they're going to ever eat is pizza and wine and donuts. So
Yeah.
can you talk to that a little bit? How do you learn to
Yeah.
trust yourself around food?
Yeah, for sure. So it's a totally valid concern. And I know I hear that a lot too, when especially people that will say, like, oh, well, I can't like start incorporating all food because I'm just going to binge on everything and everything and I won't be able to stop. But one thing that I can't stress enough is that there's actually a proven theory where it's called the habituation effect, or like the habituation when it comes to food. So something that I think will be able to really put it into perspective, that it's not the case that you're just gonna want to eat like donut and pizza all day long, is that, for example, if let's say you get a new, I don't know, a new shirt, a new piece of electronic or something like that, it's going to be really exciting at first, right? And you're going to be like, oh my god, I want to like wear this all the time, or play with my PS5 or whatever all the time, you know. But then after a while, that excitement kind of wears off, and then it just becomes like meh, just like it becomes really neutral, like every other thing that you own. And
Mhm.
it's the same thing that happens with food. We think that excuse me, that once we start eating like the pizza and the donut, we won't be able to stop. And I have to say that it is true that when you start with intuitive eating, there is this period where you are going to feel like you're not that you're going to feel like you're losing control, but it's going to
Mhm.
be like it's going to be a learning curve a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
And you may notice that you're going to eat like more than you normally would. You may eat like way past fullness, and that's also okay, but it's part of the learning process, and you
Mhm.
have to go through that in order to come on the other side and finally get to a point where you get neutral with food.
Yeah.
And it's also the same concept, like you have the habituation effect, but also I call it, and I think it's a thing, but like the buffet effect. So when
Mhm.
people go on vacation and they're like, screw it, I'm just gonna eat everything and everything, I'm on vacation, doesn't matter. And then you go out every day for like 5 days out of a week vacation, and you like eat like three pieces of cheesecake every single day, and
Mhm.
life is good. And every time that you eat, you just become like so full, you just want a nap. But by the seventh day, chances are you probably won't want three pieces of cheesecake that day, because you're just going to become so sick of it.
Yep.
And you're just going to be like, you know what, maybe just half a piece or one piece is going to be more than enough to satisfy me.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how it works. So that's just to clarify,
Mhm.
for anyone that may wonder how it works. Because also something I think it's also important to mention is that whenever we start binging on certain food, that's our body's natural reaction to restriction. So
Yeah.
it's not because you don't have enough willpower or that you're not strong enough and so forth. It's just like that's literally how your body works.
Yeah.
It thinks that whenever you're restricting, your body can't differentiate between starvation and just restricting because you want to be thin.
Yes.
So whenever you're restricting, your body's like, oh my God, we're starving. We're in the middle of the desert somewhere. We're just going to die. So whenever food becomes available again, the body's like, oh my God, we have to stock up. We don't know when the next starvation is going to come. So, so that we have energy in case if there's another starvation that comes. So that's a natural process that the body goes through. So whenever you feel out of control around food, it's just this natural process that's taking place. But it doesn't last forever. And we can promise you on that. And how I came to trust myself around food. So a few things, because again, it was a learning curve, but things that I like to remind myself is that one, our bodies are like so smart. Our bodies knows best. And, when we start feeling out of control, we have to first give ourselves compassion and like tell ourselves that, everything's going to be okay. It's a learning curve. We're doing the best we can with what we have. And also just keeping in mind that, well, I guess one, trusting the process, that whenever this period may happen, that, with the habituation effect and the buffet effect, that is just a natural thing that will occur. And also one thing that I did find that was really helpful when I was trying to, trust myself around food and like really navigating the whole thing with intuitive eating was to really find also a support system that was there to like cheer me on and support me and like validating that, my fears were like heard and valid. But just like generally speaking, just kind of like, especially when it comes to that with like trusting yourself around food, trusting the process, giving yourself some compassion and knowing that your body knows what it's doing and just trusting that everything's going to turn out fine. You're not going to die from, eating like 2 donuts for like 4 days in a row. Like there's no judgment with it. And you can't do intuitive eating wrong either.
That's
so
a good
I think
point.
that's important.
Yeah. There are really no rules. There's like 10 guidelines, principles, but they're not hard and fast rules. It's all about just, learning to get in touch with your body and what it needs.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the big question, Chanelle.
Okay.
You talked about how the real motive behind all of your healthy eating attempts were to maintain a thin body.
Yeah.
And I've talked on this show lots of times about how health isn't necessarily found in a size, that health at every size is possible. So when you embraced intuitive eating and gave up your dieting quest, like myself, you gained some weight. Right? It happened to me, it happened to you. And that is everybody's biggest fear. When they, apart from not being able to control themselves around food, the biggest fear is like, I might gain weight.
Yeah.
So how did you make peace with the weight gain?
Yeah. So I have a few different tools that I will give you guys. But one thing that I know we were just talking about before we hopped on the call is that a story I think that will resonate a lot with people on why, like, kind of again, going back to, we think that it's about the food or we think it's about, being like healthy and all that, but how it's usually like a deeply rooted cause that makes us, use food as a way to cope. So one of the things that I did find really interesting, and like, just so you know, and I'm sure you probably will be able to relate as well, like, even though we're like professional in this field, we still have our days where we struggle. And for me, when I realized that I had gained weight through like my journey with intuitive eating, which, again, it can be totally normal process because everyone has a different set point. And one of the things is that I remember I went over to my parents' house, and like by that time I had knew, like and again, in air quote, I said I accidentally, but I didn't accidentally, is that my parents like at my place, I don't have a scale at home because I don't base my work on the scale. And I know that the scale is just a number. It doesn't dictate how I feel in my body necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So, but my parents have a scale at home. And one day I went and I was like, oh, I'm just curious. Like, I know it's not going to bother me. Like, I'm at a place where I made peace with my body and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And then I jumped on the scale and realized that I had gained some weight. And at first I was like devastated. And it's like, it's super normal because again, it's like, we chase this thin ideal and trying to maintain a thin body because of what it says about us. And for me, when I saw that I had gained some weight, I was like, kind of scared of like, oh, well, will my partner still love me? Like, what are my parents going to say? And one thing that really gave me perspective on why it's really not about the weight is that when I like finally like calmed myself and like a week had passed and I went back to my parents and I was wearing this tank top, and one of the things was that I gained some weight in my arms for some reason. That's okay. And my dad came up to me and he was like, oh, like, did you gain some weight? Like, are you like, eating more than you should? And like, he was just making like those comments about like my body. And like, I had like tried to prepare myself mentally for it and like telling myself, like, no matter what they say, I know my worth, I feel good in my body, but I couldn't help. But the first thing that popped in my head when he said that was, I'm getting chills just thinking about it, but it was like, my dad loved me best or loved me better when I was in my eating disorder days, because I felt like at that time he cared more about me than he did in that moment. I know that wasn't the truth. Like, that was just my perception of it. And that's just the first thought that came up. But that really made me realize that me chasing thinness and me chasing health in the purpose of being thin was never about really like being healthy, because health is like how you feel in your body. I mean, there's other like a lot of purposes that goes that things that mix up health. But for me, when I realized that, for me gaining weight, the thing that really triggered me was because I felt like I wasn't accepted by my parents, that I wouldn't be loved as much. And that's that's what got triggered within me. And it's just made me realize that probably like for the years past that I've dieted probably came from that same fear of just wanting to be accepted by others and being loved by my family, my peers, and my community. So in that case, it's really looking at, and that's why it's always like, with intuitive eating, it's mostly never about the food. It's about pretty much everything else that's going on in our life. But it's really about like digging deeper into what is making us feeling out of control around food, not the food itself. So that's kind of like my story around weight gain. And I think that probably some of you will be able to resonate in that way. But I thought it was really important to share that perspective. But another thing that I also wanted to add when it comes to like, okay, so if you've gained weight or if you do gain weight in the process, which again is totally fine, how can you make peace with weight gain? So for me, one of the things that even though that it was really hard at time, I have to admit, because I mean, we live in a society that like worship thinness in like every single area of life, is that I was trying to keep reminding myself like the pros and the cons of like my life now versus then. So like whenever like I was restricting, I was miserable, I wasn't like having social interaction with my friends because I was isolating. I was always feeling I wasn't feeling great in my body because I would always go on binges, and then restriction, I would feel weak and then feel full and so forth. Versus now, yes, I may have gained some weight, but I've gained so much freedom. For one, freedom of like my mental space. Like I actually have space in my mind to think of other things aside from food. Isn't that crazy?
It's really fun.
Right? Like there's so many things I can think of now. But also is to keep reminding myself that, weight isn't a sole determiner of health. And even though I have gained weight, I feel incredible in my body.
Yeah.
And, I feel really great. I eat in a way that nourishes me, but that also nourishes my soul. I move in a way that makes me feel great, not because I'm trying to get the gains or trying to lose weight or so forth. So for me, focusing on that versus how my body looks has been really important in my journey with weight gain. But also, whenever that doesn't work, then other things that I do is that I'm always trying to look for proof, as they would say. So like proof that what I'm going through is absolutely normal and that I shouldn't be chasing thinness. So for example, with the set point theory, where our body is meant to be at a certain size in order to function like in the most optimal way, because everyone could be eating and exercise the same but still be in different bodies. And that's the reality of things, because body diversity is a real thing. So I tried to remind myself that. And two other things that also been really helpful is that I try to surround myself with people that love and accept me the way that I am, but also to, especially like in an era where social media is big, especially in confinement and with COVID, I really try to make sure, like I did a big cleanup of whoever I was following on social media, and to make sure to follow more like body positive, body neutral, and like people that were like, I guess, with the body acceptance movement, but also with like health at every size and so forth. So that I would be like, instead of being exposed to like 10 bodies that are being like worship, which again, all sizes are good sizes. Is just like, in for the people that are chasing thinness in order to be like whole or do anyway. So I was trying to find accounts and find books and other things that I could surround myself with that would portray the type of people or the type of belief that I now have, but also like people that are like, in a similar body that I am. Because like, I remember going on social media and like seeing all like those thin bodies and like bikinis with like flat abs and so forth. Like it just triggers me. Well, it did trigger me at that time of wanting to restrict and lose weight to achieve that, right? But now that I'm following like accounts on social media that's like people like in various different body size and different race and so forth, that it really makes me see that body diversity is a real thing. You can be confident in your body no matter at which size. And it just gave me that little bit of hope that one day I could get there, which every day I'm getting closer to that. So that's all good things. And the last thing I would add to that would be to just give myself compassion through the process. So important, because I think that especially because with society, like, and again, worshiping like thinness and like, being like a certain size, it's really like, how would I say that? It's not like an act of rebellion to just go and like be, your own person in your own body size, but it's to really like, give yourself compassion that, you are doing the best that you can with what you have, and you just trust that your body knows what it's doing, and to just give yourself that love, because there is some people that can be mean, like, because there's a lot of fat phobia out there, and people think that, fat is the worst thing that could happen to you. So to be able to give yourself compassion through the process, or find people that can support you through the process, is like super important. Absolutely. Super important. I can't say that enough. So that's kind of like my tips and my stories around weight gain. Obviously I had a lot to say about it, because it's a really important topic to me.
It is a really important topic. And I love everything you said there. You had so many really great practical tools, ones that I've employed myself. But I think one thing I really just want to highlight that you said that's really important is that like those bad body days will still happen, and they probably
100%.
for the rest of our lives, right? We're still going to have those thoughts of there's
Yeah.
something wrong with my body. It happens to me. I'll wake up
Hmm.
some days and think I need to lose weight or this or that. But all of those suggestions that you just
Yeah.
said are what I go back to. And the one that I always come back to that always works, like you said, is thinking about what my life was like in the past with
Hmm.
all of those rules and all that restriction and all that isolation, and
Yeah.
think about how it is now. Like it's so
Hmm.
much easier. There's so much
Yeah.
in my brain. Why would I want to go back to that? Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my exact feelings.
So
Like,
true.
especially it's like you said, like on days where I'm struggling and I'm like on like the verge of like thinking of going back, and I'm like, I would
Oh
go back
no.
to all that bullshit when I'm like having it so good right now. I'm like
Uh-huh.
enjoying food out with friends. I'm like no longer like bashing myself for my eating habit. I feel good in my body.
Mhm.
I'm enjoying like movement that isn't like punitive or restrictive. And like, man, like life is good.
It
So like,
is.
why would I want to go back to like that just in order to be 10? Like I can address that like, deeper issue in other ways than trying to restrict and have all those other side effects that are not so fun with it.
Yeah,
So
because what you know now is that that thought about needing to be thinner is just a symptom of something else, right?
yeah,
It has nothing to do with your body or the way you're eating.
100%.
Right? It's something else that's going on in your life that's just the body, and the food is just a distraction. I always say,
Yeah,
like, this
yeah,
is just
it's true.
a cue for me to dig deeper, that there's something else that needs my attention.
Hmm.
Oh man, that was a really great conversation. I knew it would be.
I was excited.
Me too. Oh, thank you so much. I know you've given me lots to think about. I think this will be a really impactful episode for our
I
listeners.
hope so.
And I know that they are going to want to stay in touch with you. So could you please share how they can find you and get lots more of Chanelle's nuggets of wisdom?
Yes. So at the moment, I'm most active on social media. So people can find me over on Instagram. I'm at Chanelle underscore Belliveau. That's pretty straightforward. It's just my name. I think there's like two accounts with that same name. So,
I will
so
link in the show notes for clarity.
cool, cool. So yeah, so you can find me there on Instagram. I'm like, for me, a big part of what I cherish about the work that I do, I really, really value community. So I always try to encourage, like, if there's anyone with any questions, concerns, like, hit me up in my DMs anywhere. I'm like so grateful to be able to talk to people about this stuff and like further down the conversation. And I feel really grateful that people feel, called to open up to me about, because I mean, it's a really sensitive topic.
For sure.
So I just want people to know that, you can reach me out on there. I'm both on Instagram and Facebook. I have my website still in the works. So yeah, so that's going to be up next. But at the moment, best place to reach me and see all of my free content, and the videos and everything that I do would be over on social media, but under my name. So
Great. And I've been mentioning on the podcast recently about the summit that's coming up in April,
yeah.
Embrace Your Radiance. And Chanelle is going to be one of our guest experts that week too.
Woo!
So if you want to dive deeper on this topic and hear more from Chanelle, then I encourage you to check out the link for Embrace Your Radiance in the show notes as well and get
Mhm.
registered for that amazing event. So thank you so much, Chanelle, for
Thank
coming and
you.
sharing with us. This was such a great talk.
So fun.
All the best to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I told you we were going to go deep today. I wonder what resonated with you from that episode. I'd love for you to reach out with a DM and let me know. If you loved this episode, please share it. Chanelle and I are both so passionate about our mission to help women break free from dieting. So we really appreciate when you help spread the word about our work. And go give Chanelle a follow over on Instagram. She's got so much good content to share with you. Before you sign out, don't forget to check out the link in the show notes for Embrace Your Radiance, the non-diet health summit I mentioned in the intro. It's really going to be amazing, value-packed event that you won't want to miss. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I so appreciate you. I'll see you back here next week where I have one more guest interview with my friend Lindsay Sarson. She's going to chat with us about how we can eat intuitively even if we have real food restrictions. It's a great follow-up to today's show. So until then, feel free to connect with me over on Instagram or Facebook at Radiant Vitality Wellness, and you can learn more about how to work with me on my website, radiantvitality.ca. Be well, my friends, and here's to your radiant vitality. Hey, before you go, I just want to tell you how grateful I am for you. It means the world to me that you're part of our Radiant Vitality community. I've got a free gift for you. Head on over to my website and download The Motivation Secret, the simple mindset shift that will get you off the start-stop cycle for good. The link is in the show notes. And hey, if you enjoy this podcast, the greatest gift you could give me is to leave a review or share this episode with a friend. Your shares and reviews help move our show up the rankings on the podcast directories so that it can be seen by more women just like you who are ready for something different with fitness. Bye for now, friend.